In Indian economy, in Unit 2, we had, in the last session that had, we had started our discussion on the economic systems, and we understood that there are basically two different types of economic systems which are diametrically opposite of each other. And we also understood what's the difference between them, and we also eventually came to this understanding that there does not exist any 100% pure planned economy or 100% pure free market economy. All the economic systems in different countries can be said to be existing at a particular point on this scale. Those towards right are known as more inclined towards pure free market economy, pure free market economic systems, while those towards left have more characteristics of a planned economy or a controlled economy or a communistic kind of an economy. We also understood that those in the middle are called the mixed economies. Now friends, now that we have understood what mixed economies are, they are neither towards the left nor towards the right. They are somewhere in the middle, and they demonstrate the characteristics of both the leftist as well as the rightist economic systems. Fine. So today our discussion is going to be on India as a mixed economy. As I said earlier also, just like China, India can be placed somewhere here, and India basically is a mixed economic system. We have elements of both pure free market economy as well as pure planned economy in almost equal proportion, and hence we are known as mixed economy. Right? So this is what we need to understand, that India is somewhere here. Fine. In 1950s, India used to be somewhere towards the left extreme. We were more communist. In fact, a better word would be we were more socialist, and our policies resembled the communist kind of policies, or the policies which are generally seen in pure planned economies, command and control economies. But by the time the century change and 2000s arrived, India had moved towards the right, which meant that India slowly moved away from being a pure planned economy, and more of the sections in the Indian economy started moving towards pure free market economy. Fine. I hope you would recall what you have discussed in business environment, or what you have gone through in your subject on business environment, wherein you understood how in 1991 LPG was affected, liberalization, privatization and globalization. Now this was a marked movement from the left towards the right, because so many businesses were liberalized. There was no requirement of obtaining any prior approval from the government. License Raj, Permit Raj was done away with. So now this was a reduction in the role of government in business, and this was a movement towards the right. Fine. I hope you remember that pure planned economies or command and control economies, they generally witness a lot of government intervention. But since in 1991 we did away with License Raj, Permit Raj, basically we reduced government intervention, and that is why I am saying that there was a movement towards the right. Now let us discuss India as a mixed economy in a little more detail. We should know that in India, as I said, being a mixed economy, you will find that elements of both centrally planned economy, a communist kind of economy, or a socialist kind of economy, command and control kind of economy. So we find the characteristics of these kind of economic systems also, and being a mixed economy, we also find some characteristics of a free market economy also in India, right? So this is what we are going to discuss now. Please understand that in India, initially there was a lot of stress on economic planning by the government at the center level. So the government set up a planning commission at the center, and this was responsible for planning for the whole country, and the time range for which the planning commission used to make plans used to be around 5 years, right? And that is why till 1951 to 2017 we have had 12 5-year plans. Fine. There were some years in between wherein we didn't have any plan because of various reasons. For example, 1965 there was a war with Pakistan, and there were other issues also. So barring a few years, we had 5-year plans for almost the whole duration from 1951 to 2017. In 2017, Planning Commission was disbanded and it was replaced by Niti Aayog by the NDA government led by Mr. Modi. So that happened in the year 2015 basically. So since the tenure of the 12th 5-year plan was 2012 to 2017, so once the tenure of the 5-year plan, the 12th 5-year plan ended in 2017, Niti Aayog fully took over, right? So why am I giving you this background? Just to make you understand that in India, planning was done in a centralized fashion, though there was some planning done at the lower levels at the state government level also, but by and large a significant chunk of planning was done at the central government level through the planning commission, and now it is being done by Niti Aayog, right? So this is an element of government intervention, this is an element of government planning. How many resources would be devoted to which particular field of activity, what would be produced. So there is still a lot of government intervention, and this is an example of that. Again, India is a mixed economy. Why? Because there is coexistence of both public sector, which means 51% or more of the ownership with some public organization. It could be the state government organizations, central government, or any other organization which basically is part of the central or the state government. And private sector is wherein the private individuals hold more than 50% ownership, a majority ownership, right? And in India, there is a coexistence of both public and private sector, and this is why India is a mixed economy. India is neither a 100% capitalist kind of an economy, a free economy. India is also not a leftist or a socialist or 100% command and control economy. There exists both public as well as private sector enterprises in different fields of activities. For example, and you would recall this discussion in the business environment that you had on industrial policies, and from that discussion you would recall that in India still some of the sectors are monopolized by public sector. No private participation is allowed in those sectors. For example, atomic energy. The production of atomic energy is done by only public sector organizations. It is not done by any private firm, any private organization, right? Again, as far as the operations of railways are concerned, we are not saying the building of railway wagons or railway coaches. We are not talking about that, or laying down the railway infrastructure, the railway track. We are talking about railway operations, running the trains. Now this is monopolized by the public sector. There is a particular organization which you know as Indian Railways, and they decide how to operate trains, what would be the timings, what would be the schedule, which would be the places that would be covered by the railway network. So this is decided by them. No private enterprise can run a railway operation here in India. So here we see in these sectors there is presence of public sector. Again, on the other hand, if you talk about strategically less important sectors like consumer good industries, for example, what do we mean by consumer goods? We have fast moving consumer goods like toothpaste, hair oil, toothbrush, soaps, and then we have consumer durables like fridges and ACs and televisions. Now please understand that these are not strategically very important for the country. Even if you produce one less car, this is not going to be a big problem for the country. So here the government has allowed participation from the private sector, and you would find that all these companies which are producing these consumer goods, be it LG, be it Samsung, be it Sony, be it BPL, be it Hindustan Unilever Limited, which brings the fast moving consumer goods, or Procter and Gamble, all these are basically privately owned companies. So there's participation of private sector only in these kind of businesses, and there is absolutely no involvement of any public sector enterprise. And then there is a third category where you find both the public sector enterprises as well as the private sector enterprises. For example, let's talk about health. The district hospital Pithoragarh is a public sector enterprise, while Max or Apollo hospitals or the private clinics opened up by the doctors, they are example of private participation in health services. Again, you know that we have got private schools as well as government schools, private management institutions, government management institutions. Banking, we have ICICI on one hand, which is a private firm, and then we have the public sector banks, for example, the Punjab National Bank or the Union Bank of India, the Bank of Baroda, SBI. They are examples of public sector banks. So we have presence of both public and private sector. Fine. Coal mining also nowadays. Coal mining, कोयले को ज़मीन से निकालना is coal mining, is allowed by the private sector. They can also participate. Steel production, you know, Tata Steel, you talk about Tata Steel a lot many times in various subjects, quoting the example of Tata Steel. This is an example of a presence of private sector in steel production. On the other hand, we have got Steel Authority of India Limited. Please keep noting down these things. This is a government organization, PSU. Oil refining, we have companies like Reliance on the one hand, and then we have companies like Indian Oil Corporation, IOC. So IOC basically is a public sector organization. Telecom, we have public sector organizations. Can you name them? BSNL and MTNL. MTNL basically provides service in Delhi. On the other hand, we have also got private sector telecommunication service providers like Airtel, Vodafone Idea, for example. So there's existence of both the private as well as public sector in these sections of the economy, right? However, that does not mean that we only keep encouraging the public sector. There's a lot of encouragement to the private sector also. Fine. For example, tax breaks are given to the private sector. Uttarakhand was formed in 2000, and there was a tax break which was given to companies which were ready to set up their factories here in Uttarakhand. The objective was to generate job and to ensure that the people do not have to migrate out of the state in search of jobs, right? But these tax breaks were given for 10 years for companies setting up their factories here in Uttarakhand. So government also incentivizes the private sector. Many times we have got incentives. For example, only recently the government has decided to provide some incentives to the exporters. You must have heard of the road tax scheme, right? This was discussed in the class last year only. So road tax scheme, the incentives are provided to the exporters so that they can export more. Now this again is an example of encouragement to private sector. Then we have got the Make in India scheme, where the government is encouraging not only the Indian manufacturers to keep manufacturing here, but also the foreign manufacturers, foreign companies to come to India and invest here and set up their own production plant here. So this is an example of how private sector is encouraged here in India. And then many public sector organizations or joint ventures between government and private sector organizations were gradually converted into private enterprises. For example, if you talk about Maruti Udyog, which you today know as Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Maruti Udyog was a joint venture between the Japanese firm Suzuki Motor Corporation and the government of India. And slowly, this Maruti Udyog was privatized. Government of India sold its share, and now Suzuki Motor Corporation holds more than 80% of the shares of the company, and basically Maruti Udyog, the name has also therefore been changed to Maruti Suzuki India Limited, is basically as a private enterprise now. Likewise, Balco was privatized. Shares were sold to the private entrepreneurs, Bharat Aluminium Corporation. Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited was also sold to, if I am not wrong, it was sold to Tata Teleservices. So this way many public sector organizations, public sector banks, many organizations in the public sector were slowly and gradually privatized, which meant the government withdrew its ownership and sold its ownership to the private entrepreneurs. So this again is an example of how both public and private sector coexist here in India, and that is why India is a mixed economy. Right, now let us talk about other aspects of being a mixed economy. In India, there is no fundamental right to property. You have the right to property, but it is not a fundamental right of yours. Fine? You know that from Article 14 to Article 32, you have some fundamental rights. If they are violated, you can go straight away to the High Court or to the Supreme Court. On the other hand, for normal rights, you cannot go straight away to High Court or Supreme Court. You will have to pursue your case in the subordinate courts. So, right to property has been made a normal right. It's no more. It's a legal right now. It's no more a fundamental right, and this change happened years earlier. So, since right to property is not a fundamental right, and this is a characteristic of a communistic kind of economy, a centrally planned economy, and hence Indian economy also has features of a centrally planned economy. Right? The work conditions are also very strictly monitored and regulated. For example, if you've got different acts, you'll be studying about these acts in the 5th semester. So we have got Factory Act, Industrial Disputes Act, Minimum Wages Act, right? And then we have got wage boards. Workers' participation in management is also encouraged. Fine. So what do the wage boards do? Basically, they help decide the wages, and they help revise the wages on a frequent basis. And workers' participation in management is making the workers' participation in the management of their own organization, right? So the workers are also accorded the decision-making power because they are made part of the management. Fine. So these things are there in India, and because of which we can say that the work conditions here are strictly regulated, and this takes India closer to the centrally planned economy kind of system. Fine. But though this is the case, but we also encourage private ownership. We also have private firms operating in so many businesses. So that is giving India characteristic of a free market economy. So basically India is a mix of the two. It has both characteristics of a free market economy as well as a centrally planned economy, right? Again, subsidy to weaker sections of society is given. I hope you recall our discussion in the last session that we had, wherein we talked about how in a centrally planned economy, I hope you remember this, shared minimum standards of living. This is what is encouraged. Fine. And now, if you look at here in India, now food and fuel subsidy is given not to rich individuals but to poorer sections of the society. Fine. For example, the free of cost food was made available to the poor sections of the society during the corona outbreak, during the corona pandemic, right? Again, government has brought up PM Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is basically a transfer of rupees 6,000 in a particular year to rural farming community members, to small farmers working in their villages in rural areas. And likewise, we have got old age pension scheme. So those people who are all alone, who do not have anybody to take care of them, or even if they have somebody to take care of them but they cannot earn something to be able to afford their own medicines or to be able to afford their own food, for them we have got the old age pension scheme, where such old people are given away monthly pensions. Fine. So these are basically elements which show you that India also has a little bit of a centrally planned economic kind of a character, or a socialist or a communist kind of a character. Though the encouragement that we are providing to the private sector means that we also have the characteristic of a free market economy. So in essence, India is basically a mix of the two, and that is why we are saying that India is a mixed economy. So thank you very much for your time.